What happens when ordinary people find themselves in extraordinary and terrifying situations? Tonight, I'm sharing 7 true horror stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about safety. These aren't fictional tales. These are real experiences from real people who lived through absolute nightmares. So dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for stories that will haunt your dreams. My name is Sarah Chun, and I've been a registered nurse for 8 years. I worked the night shift at Riverside General Hospital, a mid-sized facility in Portland, Oregon. If you've never worked nights in a hospital, you can't imagine how different it feels from the day's shift. The hallways stretch longer, shadows seem deeper, and every sound echoes with an eerie quality that puts you on edge. It was a Tuesday night in November when everything changed. The hospital was unusually quiet. Only half the beds were occupied, and most patients were sleeping peacefully. I was assigned to the 3rd floor, which houses our long-term care patients. Around 2:30 a.m., I was doing my routine medication rounds when I noticed something odd. Room 312, which had been empty for weeks due to renovations, had its light on. I walked over to investigate, assuming maintenance had left it on by mistake. But when I peered through the small window in the door, I saw an elderly woman sitting on the edge of the bed. She was wearing a hospital gown and staring directly at the door. Directly at me, my heart skipped a beat. We didn't have any new admissions that night, and I knew every patient on the floor. I checked the admission records on my tablet. Room 312 was listed as vacant and under maintenance. Confused, I knocked gently and entered. The room was empty. No woman, no disturbed bedding, nothing. The light was off. I stood there for a moment, questioning my own sanity. Night shifts can play tricks on your mind, especially when you're tired. But then I heard it, a woman's voice singing softly from down the hall. It was an old lullaby, barely audible but unmistakably there. I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing in the sterile corridor. The singing seemed to be coming from room 318, but when I arrived, I found Mrs. Peterson, an 87-year-old woman with dementia, sleeping soundly. The singing stopped. I returned to the nurse's station, shaken but trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. Maybe it was a ventilation system creating strange sounds, or perhaps I was more exhausted than I realized. But as I sat down to update patient charts, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The security monitor showing the 3rd floor hallway displayed a timestamp from 3 hours earlier, but I could see myself on screen walking toward room 312 in real time. I called the security office immediately. Jim, the night security guard, came up to check the system. He confirmed that the monitor was malfunctioning, showing a loop of earlier footage. But here's what terrified me. In the loop footage, I could see the elderly woman I'd seen in room 312 walking behind my recorded image, following me down the hallway. Jim pulled up the digital logs from our keycard access system. According to records, room 312 had been accessed 17 times that night, but no key cards were used. The door had somehow been opening and closing on its own. We reviewed the backup security footage from the main server, and there it was, clear as day, the elderly woman entering and exiting room 312 throughout the night. But she cast no shadow and appeared semi-transparent in certain lighting. We discovered later that the room had been closed for renovations after a patient named Eleanor Hartwell had died there 6 months earlier. She'd been a long-term patient who had no family and spent her final days alone, singing lullabies to comfort herself. The maintenance work had been delayed repeatedly due to staff reports of strange sounds and unexplained cold spots in the room. I requested a transfer to the day shift the following week. I never worked another night at Riverside General, and I never saw Eleanor again. But sometimes when I drive past the hospital after dark, I can swear I see a figure in the 3rd floor window of room 312, waiting for someone to keep her company through the long, lonely nights. I'm Marcus Rodriguez, and I've been driving for Uber for 3 years now. It started as a side hustle to pay off student loans, but I ended up making it my full-time job. I prefer working late nights, less traffic, better surge pricing, and usually interesting conversations with passengers heading home from bars or late dinners. Everything changed on a Friday night in March. I was finishing up what I planned to be my last ride of the evening when I got a pickup request from an address in the suburbs. The pickup location was a residential street in a neighborhood I wasn't familiar with, but the destination was downtown, so it promised to be a decent fare. When I arrived at the address, I found myself in front of a large, old house that looked abandoned. The windows were dark, the yard was overgrown, and there was a for sale sign that looked like it had been there for years. I double-checked the address on my app. This was definitely the right place. I waited for a few minutes, then called the passenger's number. It went straight to voicemail. Just as I was about to cancel the ride, a woman appeared from the shadows beside the house. She was maybe in her 30s, wearing a long coat and carrying what looked like a small suitcase. She opened the back door and got in without saying a word. I asked if she was my Uber passenger, and she nodded, giving me the destination address that matched what was in my app. The ride started normally, but I noticed she was unusually quiet. Most passengers at least acknowledge me or chat about their night, but she just sat in the back seat, staring out the window. About 10 minutes into the drive, I glanced in my rearview mirror and felt my blood freeze. She was staring directly at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When our eyes met in the mirror, she smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile, it was predatory. I tried to make small conversation to ease the tension. I asked about her night, the weather, anything to break the uncomfortable silence. She didn't respond to any of it. Instead, she leaned forward and whispered, "I know what you did last summer." My heart started pounding. I had no idea what she was talking about, and her voice had this strange, hollow quality that didn't sound quite human. As we approached downtown, she suddenly said, "Stop here." We were still several blocks from the destination, in front of a closed shopping center. I told her we weren't at the address yet, but she insisted this was where she wanted to get out. She handed me a $20 bill, exact change of fare, and stepped out of the car. As she closed the door, she looked directly at me through the window and said, "See you soon, Marcus." I never told her my name. I drove away as quickly as possible, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I got home, I checked my Uber app to rate the passenger and close out the ride. According to the app, I hadn't given any rides that night. There was no record to pick up, no fare charge, and no passenger to rate. It was as if the entire trip had never happened. But I still had the $20 bill. The next morning, I drove back to the pickup address in daylight, trying to make sense of what had happened. The house looked even more abandoned during the day. I knocked on the door of a neighbor and asked about the property. She told me the house had been empty for over 2 years, ever since the owner had died in a car accident. The woman described the previous owner, a woman in her 30s who had lived alone and kept to herself. The description matched my passenger exactly. I reported the incident to Uber, but without any record of the ride in their system. There was nothing they could do. I kept driving for a few more weeks, but I never felt safe again. Every pickup request made me nervous, and I found myself constantly checking my mirrors for passengers who might not be who they seemed. I quit driving for Uber a month later. The final straw came when I received a ride request from the same address where I'd picked up the mysterious woman. I declined the ride and deleted the app immediately. Some experiences are too terrifying to risk repeating, even for the money. My name is Ashley Martinez, and I'm a junior at State University majoring in psychology. Like most college students, I'm no stranger to pulling all-nighters in the library, especially during finals week. Our campus library is open 24/7 during exam periods, which is a lifesaver when you're cramming for multiple tests. It was a Wednesday night in December, 2 days before my abnormal psychology final, when I experienced something that still gives me nightmares. I claimed to study Carell on the 4th floor, which is usually the quietest section of the library. By midnight, the place was nearly empty except for a few other desperate students scattered throughout the building. Around 1:30 a.m., I decided to take a break and grab some coffee from a vending machine on the 1st floor. As I walked past the reference section, I noticed a man sitting at one of the tables. He was probably in his 40s, wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt and jeans. What struck me as odd was that he had no books, no laptop, no study materials at all. He was just sitting there, staring at an empty table. I grabbed my coffee and headed back upstairs, but Something about the man bothered me. When I passed the reference section again, he was still sitting in the exact same position, hands folded on the table, staring at nothing. I quickened my pace and returned to my corral on the 4th floor. About an hour later, I needed to use the restroom. As I walked past the elevator, I heard it ding and watched the doors open. The same man from downstairs stepped out, but now he was carrying a stack of what looked like old newspapers. He didn't acknowledge me as he walked past, heading toward the psychology section where I'd been studying. When I returned from the restroom, I found him sitting at a table directly across from my corral. The newspapers were spread out in front of him, but from where I sat, I could see that the pages were blank, completely white with no text or images. He was pretending to read them, turning pages methodically, but his eyes weren't following any text. Instead, he kept glancing up at me. I tried to focus on my studying, but I could feel him watching me. Every time I looked up, he would quickly return his attention to the blank newspapers. This continued for about 30 minutes until I couldn't concentrate anymore. I packed up my things and moved to a different floor, hoping to avoid him. I settled into a new study spot on the 2nd floor, thinking I'd escaped the strange encounter. But 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps approaching. It was him again, carrying the same stack of blank newspapers. He sat down at a table where he had a clear view of my new location and resumed his fake reading routine. At this point, I was genuinely frightened. I approached the security desk on the 1st floor and explained the situation to the night guard. He was sympathetic, but explained that as long as the man wasn't directly threatening me or violating any library policies, there wasn't much he could do. He offered to walk me to my car if I wanted to leave, but I had too much studying left to do. I decided to try one more location, a small study room on the 3rd floor that could be locked from the inside. I gathered my things and headed upstairs, constantly looking over my shoulder. The study room was empty, and I locked the door behind me, finally feeling safe. I studied for another 2 hours without incident. Around 4:30 a.m., I heard a soft tapping on the door. I assumed it was another student wanting to use the room, so I called out that I'd be finished soon. The tapping continued, but no one responded to my voice. I looked through the small window in the door and saw the man standing in the hallway, still holding his blank newspapers. He wasn't tapping on the door with his hand. He was tapping his forehead against the glass window over and over while staring directly at me. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and he had this disturbing smile on his face. I grabbed my phone to call security, but there was no cell signal in the study room. The tapping continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. Then it stopped. I waited another 30 minutes before I had the courage to look through the window again. The hallway was empty. I quickly packed my things and unlocked the door, planning to head straight to the security desk. But when I opened the door, there was a stack of newspapers on the floor directly in front of the entrance. They weren't blank. They were old editions from the 1980s, all featuring headlines about missing college students. A note was taped to the top newspaper. "You're studying the wrong subject. You should study disappearances instead." I ran to the security desk, but the night guard told me he hadn't seen anyone matching the man's description. The security cameras showed me entering and leaving the study room, but no one else appeared in any of the footage from the 3rd floor that night. The newspapers were real, but when we checked with the library staff the next day, they confirmed that those editions weren't part of their collection. I never found out who the man was or how he managed to avoid the security cameras. I finished my finals week studying at home and haven't set foot in the library after midnight since. Sometimes knowledge isn't worth the risk of finding out what's lurking in the shadows while you're trying to learn. I'm David Thompson, and I work for Secure Home Systems, installing security equipment in residential properties. It's usually straightforward work: cameras, alarms, motion sensors, and most customers are pleasant people who just want to protect their families and belongings. But there was one installation job that I'll never forget, and it's the reason I now refuse certain types of calls. The appointment was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at a house on Elm Street, a quiet suburban neighborhood with well-maintained homes and manicured lawns. The customer, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, was an elderly widow who wanted a comprehensive security system installed after some recent break-ins in the area. She seemed nervous during our initial phone consultation, mentioning that she'd been hearing strange noises at night and wanted the peace of mind that comes with professional monitoring. When I arrived at the house, Mrs. Blackwood greeted me at the door. She was probably in her 70s, impeccably dressed despite being at home, and spoke with a slight southern accent. The house was immaculate. Antique furniture, family photographs covering every surface, and the faint scent of lavender throughout. She offered me tea and cookies before we began, which wasn't unusual for elderly customers who enjoyed the company. As I started surveying property to determine the best camera placements, Mrs. Blackwood followed me around, chatting nervously about the neighborhood and how much it had changed over the years. She mentioned that she'd lived in a house for 43 years, since she and her late husband had bought it as newlyweds. What struck me as odd was how she kept referring to her husband in the present tense, as if he were still alive. I began installing cameras at the front and back entrances, working my way around the house systematically. When I reached the side yard, Mrs. Blackwood became visibly agitated. She insisted that I install an extra camera there, pointing toward a window on the second floor. She explained that someone had been trying to break in through that particular window, and she needed it monitored constantly. As I set up the ladder to install the camera, I glanced through the second floor window she'd pointed out. I could see into what appeared to be a bedroom, and there was a man sitting on the edge of the bed, watching me work. I assumed it was a family member or visitor, so I waved politely. He didn't wave back, just stared at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. When I came back down from the ladder, I mentioned to Mrs. Blackwood that I'd seen the gentleman upstairs and asked if he had any preferences of camera angle. Her face went completely white, and she grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "There's no one upstairs," she whispered. "My husband Harold died 3 years ago. If you saw someone in that room, it wasn't human." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to remain professional. Maybe she was suffering from dementia or confusion, I thought. I suggested we go upstairs together to check the room, thinking it would help clarify the situation. She reluctantly agreed, but I could see her hands shaking as we climbed the stairs. The bedroom was empty, but there was a clear impression on the bedspread where someone had been sitting. The room smelled strongly of Old Spice cologne, and the temperature was noticeably colder than the rest of the house. Mrs. Blackwood began crying, explaining that Harold used to sit in that exact spot every morning while getting ready for work. I finished the installation as quickly as possible, eager to leave the unsettling situation behind. But as I was testing the system, something appeared on the monitor that made my blood freeze. The camera pointed at the second floor window showed a figure standing inside the room, looking directly out at us. Mrs. Blackwood saw it too and began praying softly under her breath. I called my supervisor immediately, explaining that there was a technical malfunction with the equipment. But when we checked the footage again, the figure was gone. The camera was working perfectly, too perfectly. It was capturing something that shouldn't have been there. Mrs. Blackwood begged me not to leave, saying that Harold's presence had become more pronounced since I'd started installing the cameras. She believed the security system was somehow making him more visible, more active, as if to prove her point. We heard heavy footsteps walking across the floor above us. Even though we just confirmed the room was empty, I completed the installation and left detailed instructions for the monitoring service. But I also included a note in the file about unusual activity at the property. 3 days later, my supervisor called to tell me that Mrs. Blackwood had requested that all the cameras be removed. The monitoring service had received dozens of motion alerts from inside the house, showing a male figure moving through rooms that were supposed to be unoccupied. When the removal team went to the house, they found Mrs. Blackwood in the kitchen, calmly preparing dinner for 2 people. She explained that Harold had become more active since the cameras were installed, and she preferred to coexist with him peacefully rather than have his presence documented. The cameras had been making him agitated, she said, and she wanted her home to return to the way it was before. I never found out what happened to Mrs. Blackwood or whether she continued living with her deceased husband's spirit, but I learned to trust my instincts about jobs that feel wrong from the beginning. Some houses have histories that can't be secured with cameras and alarms, and some presences don't want to be watched. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm a late-night radio DJ for WKRP 101.7, a classic rock station that serves the tri-state area. I've been working the midnight to 6 a.m. shift for 5 years now, and I genuinely love the job. There's something peaceful about being alone in the studio while the rest of the world sleeps. Playing music for insomniacs, night shift workers, and long-distance truckers who rely on radio to keep them company through the dark hours. The radio station is located in an old building downtown, converted from what used to be a department store in the 1950s. My studio is on the 3rd floor, isolated from the rest of the offices and sales departments that operate during normal business hours. The building has a skeleton crew at night, just me, a security guard who makes rounds every few hours, and occasionally an engineer if we have technical problems. It was a Tuesday night in October when everything changed. I was about 2 hours into my shift, spinning a long set of classic rock, when I noticed something unusual on the request line. We have a dedicated phone number for listeners to call in with song requests or dedications, and it usually stays fairly busy, even during the late shift. But this particular call was different. The caller ID showed a local number, but when I answered, there was only silence on the other end. I said hello several times, then hung up, assuming it was a technical glitch or someone who had changed their mind about calling. But the same number called back immediately. This time, I could hear breathing on the other end, slow and deliberate, but no voice. I hung up again and made a note to mention it to our technical staff in the morning. Prank calls weren't uncommon, especially late at night when people had been drinking or were just looking for attention. But over the next hour, the same number called 17 more times. Each call followed the same pattern: silence, then breathing, then nothing. Finally, I decided to let the call go to voicemail to see if the person would leave a message. What I heard made my blood run cold. It was a woman's voice, barely above a whisper, saying, "I know you're alone up there, Jake. I know you can't leave the building. I'm coming to see you. The building has keycard access after hours, and security system logs every entry and exit." I called down to Mickey, our security guard, to ask if anyone had entered the building recently. He assured me that no one had come in since his last round, and all the exterior doors were secure. But something in his voice suggested he was nervous too. About 30 minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my studio. They were slow and deliberate, like someone trying to move quietly but not quite succeeding. My studio door is solid wood with a small window, and I could see a shadow moving back and forth in the hallway. The footsteps would approach my door, pause for several minutes, then move away, only to return a few minutes later. I called Mickey again, but there was no answer. His rounds usually took about 20 minutes, so I assumed he was somewhere in the building without cell reception. But the footsteps in the hallway continued, and I was becoming genuinely frightened. I locked my studio door and continued my show, trying to maintain a professional demeanor for the listeners who were counting on me. During a commercial break, I heard a soft tapping on my studio door. It wasn't a firm knock of someone wanting to enter. It was more like someone gently drumming their fingers against the wood. I looked through the small window and saw a woman standing in the hallway. She was probably in her 40s, wearing a dark coat, and her hair was disheveled like she'd been running or fighting strong wind. She pressed her face against the window, and I could see her lips moving, but I couldn't hear what she was saying through the soundproof glass. She held up a cell phone and pointed to it, then pointed at me. I realized she was a person who had been calling the request line all night. I picked up the request line phone, and it immediately rang. Her voice was clearer now, since she was speaking directly into phone while standing outside my door. "Let me in, Jake. I need to tell you something important. It's about Mickey." Mickey was our security guard, and she somehow knew his name. I asked her how she had gotten into the building and what she wanted with Mickey. Her response chilled me to the bone. "Mickey can't help you anymore. He's not making his rounds tonight. Open the door and I'll show you where he is." I called the police immediately, explaining that there was an intruder in the building and that our security guard might be in danger. The woman continued standing outside my door, occasionally tapping on the glass and holding her phone up to indicate I should answer when she called. The police arrived within 10 minutes, But when they searched the building, they found no sign of the woman. However, they did find Mickey in the basement utility room, unconscious but alive. He had apparently slipped on some water near the boiler and hit his head on a pipe. He was taken to the hospital with a concussion, but he recovered fully. The strange part was that there was no record of anyone entering or leaving the building during my shift. The security cameras showed me arriving and Mickey making his initial rounds, but no footage of the mysterious woman. The police reviewed hours of video from multiple angles, but she simply didn't appear anywhere in the building. When Mickey returned to work a week later, he had no memory of how he'd ended up in the basement or why he'd been near the utility room in the first place. He insisted that his usual rounds never took him to that part of the building. The woman who had called and appeared outside my studio remained a complete mystery. I still worked a late shift at WKRP, but I've never felt completely safe alone in that building again. Sometimes I wonder if the woman was trying to help by alerting me to Mickey's accident, or if her presence was somehow connected to what happened to him. Either way, I've learned to trust my instincts when something feels wrong during those long, quiet hours when most of the world is asleep. I'm Carlos Rivera, and I work as a night janitor for several office buildings in the downtown district. It's honest work that pays the bills and allows me to support my family, though it can be lonely spending 8 hours alone in empty buildings while everyone else is home sleeping. I've been doing this job for 12 years, and I thought I'd seen everything, until I encountered something in the Meridian Tower that still haunts me. The Meridian Tower is a 15-story office building that houses various businesses, law firms, accounting practices, insurance companies, and a few tech startups. I'm responsible for cleaning floors 6 through 10, which usually takes me about 6 hours to complete thoroughly. The building has good security, keycard access, cameras in all common areas, and a night security guard who makes regular rounds. It was a Wednesday night in January when I first noticed something strange. I was cleaning the 8th floor, which houses a mid-sized law firm, when I heard what sounded like typing coming from one of the offices. This wasn't unusual during tax season or when lawyers were working on big cases, but it was 3:30 a.m., and according to security log, no one had entered the building since closing time. I investigated the sound and found that it was coming from a corner office belonging to someone named Patricia Hoffman. According to the nameplate on the door, the office was dark, but I could clearly hear the rapid clicking of keyboard keys. I knocked gently and called out, identifying myself as building maintenance, but the typing stopped immediately. When I tried the door handle, it was locked, which was standard procedure for all offices after hours. I made a note to mention it to the security guard during his next round, but when I saw him an hour later, he told me that Ms. Hoffman had died in a car accident 3 weeks earlier. The law firm was still in the process of clearing out her office and hadn't yet reassigned the space. According to building records, her key card had been deactivated the day after her death. I thought maybe it was the building settling or the heating system making strange noises. But the next night, I heard the typing again. This time, I brought my cell phone and recorded the sound. It was definitely typing, not random clicking, but the steady rhythm of someone composing a document. I could even hear the occasional pause, as if the person was thinking about what to write next. By the third night, I was dreading my shift. I tried to avoid the 8th floor altogether, focusing on my other assigned areas, but I couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious typing. Finally, I decided to investigate more thoroughly. I convinced the night security guard, Marcus, to unlock Ms. Hoffman's office so we could see what was causing the sound. The office was exactly as she had left it. Legal documents stacked neatly on the desk, family photos on the credenza, and a computer that had been shut down weeks ago. But when we entered, the typing sounds were clearly coming from the computer area, even though the monitor was black and the tower appeared to be off. Marcus checked all the connections and confirmed that the computer was unplugged from the wall. As we stood there trying to rationalize what we were hearing, the typing suddenly stopped. Then, slowly, the computer monitor flickered to life, displaying a Word document with text appearing in real time, as if someone were typing at that very moment. The document was a legal brief for a case that Ms. Hoffman had been working on before her death. Marcus and I watched in stunned silence as paragraphs of legal text appeared on the screen, formatted perfectly and containing complex legal arguments that neither of us could have composed. The typing sound corresponded exactly with the appearance of each letter on the screen. After about 10 minutes, the typing stopped, and a single line appeared at the bottom of the document. "Tell them I finished the Morrison case. The files are in my desk drawer." We immediately called the managing partner of the law firm, who came to the building within an hour. When we showed him the document, he was speechless. The Morrison case had indeed been Ms. Hoffman's final project, and the legal brief we'd witnessed being typed was exactly what the firm needed to complete their work for client. More importantly, when we checked her desk drawer, we found additional files and notes that had been missing since her death. The managing partner explained that Ms. Hoffman had been incredibly dedicated to her work, often staying late to ensure her clients received the best possible representation. The Morrison case was particularly important to her because it involved a family fighting for custody of their children. She had apparently promised the clients that she would finish their brief before her court date, which was still 2 weeks away. The computer was examined by IT specialists, but they found no logical explanation for what had occurred. The machine had been completely powered down, with no network connection and no power source. Yet somehow, it had generated a complex legal document that saved a law firm's case and helped a family in crisis. I continued working in the Meridian Tower for several more months, but I never heard the typing sound again. Ms. Hoffman's office was cleaned out and reassigned to another attorney, and the Morrison family won their custody case using the brief that had mysteriously appeared on her computer. Sometimes I wonder if dedicated people can leave behind more than just memories. Maybe they can leave behind their commitment to finishing important work, even after death. I've learned to respect the spaces I clean and the people who worked in them. Office buildings aren't just structures filled with desks and computers. They're places where people spend significant portions of their lives, pursuing goals and helping others. And sometimes, apparently, that dedication transcends death itself. My name is Linda Foster, and I work as an emergency dispatcher for the County 911 Center. It's a high-stress job that requires quick thinking and the ability to stay calm under pressure. But it's also incredibly rewarding to know that you're helping people during the worst moments of their lives. I've handled thousands of calls over my 7-year career: medical emergencies, house fires, domestic disputes, and everything in between. But there was one call that I'll never forget, and it still gives me chills when I think about it. It came in on a quiet Sunday night in September, during what we call the graveyard shift, midnight to 8 a.m. These shifts tend to be slower than daytime hours, with mostly drunk driving incidents, domestic calls, and the occasional medical emergency. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. when I answered with my standard greeting. 911, what's your emergency? I heard a young girl's voice, probably around 8 or 9 years old. She was whispering urgently, and I could tell she was terrified. "There's someone in our house," she whispered. "He's downstairs, and I can hear him walking around. My mom and dad won't wake up, and I'm scared." I immediately began following our protocol for home invasion calls, dispatching police units to the address that appeared on my screen while keeping the child on the line. I asked her name, and she told me it was Emma. I tried to keep my voice calm and reassuring while gathering information about her location and the intruder. "Emma, you're being very brave," I told her. "I need you to stay quiet and tell me where you are right now." "I'm hiding in my bedroom closet," she whispered. I tried to wake up my parents, but they won't get up. I think something's wrong with them. This information immediately raised red flags. I asked Emma if her parents were breathing, if she could see their chests moving up and down. There was a long pause before she answered. "I can't tell. They're really still, and there's a funny smell in their room, like when my dad uses those chemicals to clean the garage." I realized we might be dealing with a carbon monoxide situation in addition to the possible intruder. I dispatched fire and EMS units to the address and advised the responding officers about the potential gas leak. Meanwhile, I kept Emma on the line, tried to keep her calm and gather more information. "Emma, can you still hear the person downstairs?" I asked. "Yes. He's moving around in the kitchen now. He keeps opening and closing the cabinets, like he's looking for something." I could hear the fear in her voice, but there was something else that bothered me about the call. The address that appeared on my screen was for a house that I recognized. It had been the scene of a tragic incident 6 months earlier. A family of 3 had died from carbon monoxide poisoning due to a faulty furnace. The case had been widely covered in local news because the little girl, Emma Patterson, had been found in her bedroom closet, apparently trying to hide from something. But that was impossible. Emma Patterson was dead. I looked at the address again, confirming what I already knew. The house had been vacant since the deaths, pending sale by the estate. According to our records, no one lived there anymore. Yet I was clearly talking to a child who claimed to be hiding in that exact house. I stayed on the line while trying to process this information. Either someone was playing an elaborate and cruel prank, or I was experiencing something that defied explanation. The police units were only minutes away, so I decided to continue treating it as a real emergency until we knew more. "Emma, the police are almost there," I told her. "Can you tell me what the person downstairs looks like? I can't see him from here, but he's wearing heavy boots. I can hear them on the kitchen floor, and he keeps coughing like he can't breathe very well." The responding officers arrived at the house and found it exactly as it had been left 6 months earlier, empty, locked, and showing no signs of recent entry. They conducted a thorough search of the premises but found no evidence of an intruder or any indication that someone had been inside recently. The utilities had been shut off months ago, so there was no risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. But here's where it gets really strange. When the officers checked the little girl's bedroom, they found the closet door slightly open, as if someone had recently been hiding inside. There was also a child-sized handprint on the dusty closet wall, fresh enough that it hadn't accumulated the same layer of dust as the surrounding surfaces. The call lasted 18 minutes, and I have the entire conversation recorded in our system. Emma's voice was clear and consistent throughout, and she provided details about the house layout that matched the actual property. She described her parents' bedroom, the kitchen configuration, and even mentioned specific family photos that had been documented in the original investigation. When I researched the original incident, I discovered that Emma Patterson had indeed called 911 on the night her family died. She had reported an intruder in the house and had hidden in her bedroom closet, just as the caller had described. The investigating officers had determined that she was likely confused and disoriented due to carbon monoxide exposure, and that there had never been any actual intruder. I never received another call from that number, and the house was eventually sold to a family who renovated it completely. I've wondered many times if Emma was trying to finish the call she had started 6 months earlier, or she was somehow still trying to save her parents from a danger that only she could perceive. Working as a 911 dispatcher has taught me that reality isn't always as straightforward as we like to believe. Sometimes the calls we receive come from places and people that exist somewhere between life and death, between help and hopelessness. And sometimes all we can do is listen and respond with compassion, even when we can't fully understand what we're experiencing. If these stories have kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest scary content. Share these stories with friends who love a good horror tale, and let us know in the comments which story gave you the biggest chills. Remember, the truth is often stranger and more terrifying than fiction. Sweet dreams, and thanks for joining us on another journey into the darkness.